Microdosing is when you derive the maximum benefit from taking the minimum effective dose. This is how you minimize unwanted effects. People microdose daily to feel and perform better. Some people use it to enhance their creativity, to recover from workouts quicker, and to manage anxiety. Today's podcast is sponsored by Microdose Gummies and Lumi Labs. Microdose Gummies deliver perfect entry-level doses of THC that help you feel just the right amount of good. I love this company, and I'm a big fan of their products. I put a lot of effort into my career and also producing this show, so I enjoy taking microdose gummies on the weekends because I get really fantastic sleep, and I need it. The gummies are organic, infused with real fruit, and they are enjoyable. Microdose is available nationwide. To learn more about microdosing THC, go to microdose.com and use code BEYOND to get free shipping and 30% off your first order. Links can be found in the show description, but again, that's microdose.com and code BEYOND.
This podcast contains adult themes and graphic violence. Listener discretion is advised.
A commercial-free version of this podcast is available on Patreon for $1 per month. Patreon.com/Beyond Contempt podcast. I'm Renee, and this is Beyond Contempt True Crime. You're listening to episode 77, Lara Plamann. On October 17, 2007 at 10 p.m., 48-year-old Diana Sivany called the police because her partner of 9 years, Lara Plamann, was supposed to meet her friend, Andrea Shea, but didn't show up. Andrea and Lara planned to watch a movie after 7 p.m. Andrea called Lara's phone, but it went to voicemail. She eventually called Diana Sivany and spoke with her at least twice that night. This prompted Diana to contact authorities, and an officer went to Diana and Lara's home on West 7548 Wisconsin Ave in Greenville, Wisconsin, right on Highway 96, immediately west of Appleton. Lara's Grand Prix was parked in the driveway, and her wallet, license, and credit cards were inside the car, but the doors were unlocked. Her cell phone was inside the house. The officer who took the report told Diana to call again in the morning if Lara didn't return. On October 18, 2007, Diana called the police again because Lara hadn't returned home and she hadn't shown up for work, which was out of character for her. Diana gave investigators keys so they could search the outbuildings on their property. Police found 30-year-old Lara Plamann in one of the two outbuildings, approximately 50 feet away from her home. She was found deceased and seated in a chair with her arms by her side. Lara was officially pronounced dead at 1:50 p.m. The first deputy on the scene suspected a suicide, but there was no gun found near Lara's body. An initial working theory was that maybe Lara shot herself, and someone removed the gun to conceal the suicide. The investigator questioned Diana Sivany and asked if she found a suicide note, which she had not. The only information that the Outagamie County Sheriff's Captain, Michael Joby, declared was that Lara Plamann did not die of natural causes. They had not ruled out an accident, homicide, or suicide. On Monday, October 22, 2007, an autopsy confirmed a gunshot had killed Lara Plamann, and her death wasn't a suicide. Captain Mike Joby reassured the public at a press conference that the residents in the Fox Valley shouldn't feel unsafe because there was no evidence that this was a random event. There was another unsolved homicide of a woman named Connie Belter that happened the previous year. She had been bludgeoned to death in her Appleton home. The captain wanted to ease the community's feelings that the murders weren't related, and there wasn't a serial killer on the loose. Investigators spent 5 days on Lara and Diana's property collecting evidence. They went through the house, the garage, and the outbuildings. Police towed a car from the garage, and took 3 computers and a cell phone. Police opened Lara Plamann's safe, hoping to find a gun, but only found documents. It wasn't clear if Lara was killed in the outbuilding or if she was killed elsewhere, then brought to the outbuilding. Police declined to comment on the details, but the language used in the search warrant suggested that she was killed in the outbuilding. On October 23, 2007, Lara's family spoke to the media and asked the community for help. Her younger sister Abby and her sister-in-law Bridget asked those with information to call investigators. When Bridget was asked if Lara had any enemies, she said, "There's nothing we can think of. Lara didn't have any enemies. She'd cry if there were too many kittens on the farm, and Dad had to put one down." The family held a private service at their home for friends and family. They set up a memorial fund in her name, and the proceeds went to the Outagamie County 4-H, which Lara was a member of for several years. On October 30th, 2007, there was a public memorial service held at Immaculate Conception Catholic Church in Greenville, where Lara's great-uncle John was a Monsignor, and he officiated the service. Prior to the funeral, the visitation with the family was cut short because there was such a significant turnout. A line wrapped through the parking lot, and 300 people had squeezed their way into the church. Lara was born on February 19, 1977, to Larry and Mary Jo Plamann in Appleton, Wisconsin. She worked on the family farm in Grand Chute her entire life. The farm was owned by her parents and her aunt and uncle. Lara had daily chores on the farm, and this was how her passion for working with animals developed. Early on, Lara would show her family's cattle at the Outagamie County Fair in Seymour, Wisconsin. She spent many years taking part in 4-H and was involved with the Winnegamie Dog Club in Menasha. She trained and showed her Schipperke, magic. Lara also loved horses. Her school picture looked almost the same each and every year. Lara wore a collared shirt that was buttoned up, a silver necklace, medium-length blonde hair, and she had a big smile. She wore number 44 when she played basketball on her high school team. During Lara's freshman year, the team won 17 of 18 games and took the conference title. She was a member of the National Honor Society and competed with the National High School Rodeo Association. Lara had perfect attendance all 4 years of high school, which her parents were very proud of. Not surprisingly, she was a person who always showed up and always kept her word. She was the type of daughter who never missed family sit-down dinners. Lara graduated from Hortonville High School in 1995. Then she graduated with a business degree and a minor in English from St. Norbert College in De Pere, Wisconsin. Even when she was busy with college, Lara still helped her father and uncle on the family farm. Lara's family appreciated her gentle and sensitive personality, but also joked that she had some strong-willed tendencies as well. On her MySpace profile, she wrote, "I'm very patient, provided I get my own way in the end." She was quiet and reserved, but when you were in a one-on-one situation, she could be pretty sneaky, according to her sister-in-law, Bridget Plamann. If someone needed to be put in their place, she would definitely put them there. Lara became the family's source for gift shopping. She would write up gift ideas and present them to her siblings. Everyone would throw in cash, and Lara would shop for the best deal. Christmas was her favorite holiday, and she enjoyed the bright lights on the Christmas tree. Lara loved decorating for the holidays, and one year she decorated every window in the house. One Christmas, Lara snuck chicken wings out of her grandma's oven before they even made it to the dinner table. Lara was a friend to many and always had a big smile, a feisty spirit, a generous personality, and a love for animals. At the memorial service, her great-uncle John said, "Suddenly and unexpectedly, the lights went out for us, and we're asking why, because we don't know." The relationship between Lara and Diana was not mentioned during the service. Laura's MySpace profile said she was in a relationship. In Laura's obituary, Diana Sivany was listed as her special friend. Laura's sister-in-law confirmed that Diana and Laura lived together and attended family events together, but did not want to speak further about the relationship. Laura and Diana had been in a domestic partnership for 9 years, and the pair ran a business out of their home where they sold dog agility training equipment. They would assemble the equipment and ship it out all over the world. But Laura's obituary didn't just list her partner as her special friend. It also listed another woman, and I'll quote it verbatim. Laura is also survived by her special friends, Diana Sivany and Andrea Shea, along with many cousins and friends, unquote. It would take reading over 100 newspaper articles before there was a single mention of this relationship dynamic among these three women. In 2007, people were still hesitant to speak plainly about same-sex relationships, let alone talk about any atypical relationship structure. But we will circle back to this later in the story. A few months had passed, and law enforcement received a tip that a car had been parked at Laura's home a week prior to her murder. The car was a blue or purple VW Beetle convertible. Police found the owner of that car and determined that they were not a suspect in the case. By January 2008, investigators were still without suspects. Right after the murder, investigators had worked around the clock. But with few leads, it stopped being a 40-hour-a-week investigation. In May 2008, Diana Sivany wanted the police to return the items seized from her house. She filed a civil court motion asking for the cell phone and car back. Diana also wanted an inventory of items they took from her home. The motion said that the seized 2007 Pontiac Grand Am's value was dropping, and Diana was making monthly payments on the car and the cell phone. She said she needed her computer because it had business documents stored on it, which caused her business to lose profit. A judge denied her requests. Lara Plamann left most of her estate to Diana Sivany and had listed her as the special administrator for the estate. On June 6, 2008, Laura's family filed an objection. They wanted certain things in the will to be taken care of in private. Their specific objections were not published in the media, and a month later, they worked out a deal with Diana. After they settled Laura's estate, the investigation into her murder formed a direction. On December 20th, 2008, police said they found a stain in Diana's vehicle on one of the seats, but they wouldn't elaborate further. On February 18th, 2009, investigators seized a computer that had been owned by 30-year-old Candy Sivany, who was Diana's daughter. Candy had been sitting in a Minnesota prison since January 13th on drug charges that carried a 4-year sentence. The laptop had actually been stolen from Candy's home in Minneapolis while she was in prison. Candy Sivany got onto the radar of police when informants told them that they would find various internet searches involving handguns. Investigators heard Candy was searching for someone to buy a gun so she could harm Lara Plamann, and she solicited at least 5 people. The claim said that Diana Sivany was upset because Lara Plamann was seeing another woman, and this was the reason for the murder. While detectives were investigating the murder, they discovered 2 crimes had been committed. Candy and a man named Nathan Foster drove to Appleton, intending to have him beat up Lara Plamann. He told police that Diana Sivany and her daughter Candy offered him $300 to beat up Lara Plamann in spring 2006. Nathan said Diana told him to use a bat, break bones, and rearrange her face. He said that Diana wanted Lara beaten so badly that she would need to be hospitalized. The beating was supposed to take place at Andrea Shea's home, which was Laura's friend. Nathan waited for Lara Plamann, but saw a woman enter the home who was not Lara and might have been Andrea. Eventually, Lara Plamann showed up. Nathan did not want to commit an assault with this other woman there as a witness. He backed out of committing the crime. Nathan Foster was able to identify the landmarks in Appleton when he was driven around by police. Nathan Foster was both a meth dealer and a customer of Candy Sivany. He heard Candy went to jail, so he told his friends to rob her home. This was how her computer was stolen. The informant heard Candy was willing to pay $2,000 to get the computer back, but he traded it with someone else for a boat. The computer eventually ended up in the hands of the Outagamie County Police. On August 22, 2007, Candy traveled to Wisconsin with another Minnesota woman named Rosie Campbell, and they vandalized a car that was sitting at Diana and Laura's house. The vehicle belonged to Andrea Shea, who Laura was having the purported affair with. Diana Sivany had allegedly asked them to commit this crime. Diana, Laura, and Andrea had all left town, and Andrea had her car parked at Laura's house. Rosie and Candy slashed the car's tires, broke the windows, and spray painted the outside of the vehicle. They poured a sticky substance and bleach on the interior of the car. Rosie and Candy didn't forget to steal the stereo. There was over $2,500 worth of damage done to the vehicle. Rosie and Candy stayed in a motel, and Diana footed the bill. Diana left money buried on her property for them as payment. When police followed up, they confirmed Candy Sivany booked a room in the Fox Cities around the time they vandalized the car. Rosie said they damaged the car in retaliation for an alleged affair between Andrea Shea and Lara Plamann. Diana Sivany spoke with the Appleton Post-Crescent newspaper and made a statement about all the recent events. I lost a business, partner, a best friend, and a lover all in one moment. I had my home destroyed and my car taken away. They have only targeted me. I never once said anything to anybody or offered anyone any money or anything to harm Laura in any way. They have not looked anywhere else since day one. She denied knowing any of the people on the warrant except for her daughter's ex-boyfriend. I bet if you check every one of these names, they are drug-affiliated criminals that the police in some way, shape, or form have offered $250,000 or some kind of time off their sentence to make some kind of statement. So why don't you call these people? I don't know any of these people, and what you're going to find is they were badgered or offered $250,000 by investigators. Someone told me that Candy's ex-boyfriend gave a statement and then ran around at work saying he was going to get $250,000 to try and get Candy put in jail. It is all garbage. On April 16, 2010, Diana and Candy Sivany were charged with solicitation of substantial battery and criminal damage to property. Diana was not living in Wisconsin anymore. She moved to Shoreview, Minnesota, and put her home in Greenville, Wisconsin up for sale. On April 23, 2010, Diana posted her $10,000 bond and was released. She was to have no contact with the Plamann family, Nathan Foster, Rosie Campbell, or her daughter, Candy Sivany. They did not charge Nathan Foster or Rosie Campbell with the crime. On June 29, 2010, Diana Sivany violated the conditions of her release and was charged with 8 counts of felony bail jumping. Investigators reviewed phone calls from May and June 2009. Candy was in prison and called the phone of Margaret Baldwin, who lived with Diana Sivany. Some calls were also placed to Diana's cell phone. Margaret Baldwin told police that Candy would call her house and they would put her on speakerphone. Diana would give Margaret questions to ask Candy, but Diana was not that careful because her voice can be heard in the background on several calls. There was a call where Diana spoke directly with Candy. Margaret was being used as a middleman to talk about the case. Diana and Candy were communicating about dates, names, affidavits, and warrants. On July 1st, 2010, they arrested Diana Sivany for bail jumping, and she was held on a $5,000 cash bond. She additionally was prohibited from having contact with her roommate and girlfriend, Margaret Baldwin. A few weeks later, a judge warned Diana Sivany about sending coded messages through indirect means, which was also a violation of her bail. There had been a sign placed outside of her former Greenville, Wisconsin home, which said, "I love spontaneous combustion. It makes me sweat." This must have been directed at her former partner, Margaret Baldwin, who testified against Diana in court for the bail jumping charges. In January 2011, an attorney representing Diana Sivany said she couldn't receive a fair trial unless the prosecution handed over details from the related homicide investigation, since her charges were born out of this investigation. Her lawyer also wanted separate trials for the battery and property damage charges because he thought the jury might be otherwise prejudiced. He asked the judge to toss out Nathan Foster's identification of Diana because the lineup wasn't conducted properly by investigators and was performed on the hood of the officer's car. It also wasn't recorded. Nathan Foster had been living in Tennessee and refused to go into the local police department, so they did the photo lineup on the officer's car. The judge denied the defense's motion. In March 2011, a judge allowed limited contact between Diana and her daughter Candy by mail and phone. Since Candy was in jail, her phone calls and mail were monitored, and authorities could ensure they weren't discussing their cases. In May 2011, they found Diana Sivany guilty of violating the terms of her release, which resulted in 8 felony counts of bail jumping. On June 3, 2011, they sentenced her to 16 months in prison. In a strange turn of events, in August 2011, the prosecution dropped the battery case against Candy Sivany. They were concerned about turning over details from the homicide investigation to the defense, and thought it would put everything at risk. The state could refile the charges at a later date. In November 2011, charges were dropped against Diana Sivany as well. In June 2012, investigators released the car they had seized back to Diana Sivany. Around that time, they charged her with bail jumping again. Authorities discovered she wrote a letter to her daughter back in May 2011. Diana gave it to an inmate for delivery, but a correctional officer had intercepted it. On February 14, 2013, Rosie Campbell of Minnesota said she took a bullet as a memento from a gun that Candy Sivany used to kill Lara Plamann. They had offered Rosie $5,000 to pull the trigger, but she couldn't do it, so Candy stepped in. Investigators had made approximately 40 trips to Minnesota over the course of their investigation, and on February 15, 2013, they finally had their moment. There were 3 arrests made in the homicide of Lara Plamann. 53-year-old Diana Sivany, 34-year-old Candy Sivany, and 38-year-old Rosie Campbell were all charged with murder. The Sivanys also had the substantial battery charge tacked on as well. The Plamann family believed that Diana Sivany had played a role in their daughter's murder. It was police conversations with Rosie Campbell and her ex-boyfriend that led to the murder charges being filed. Candy drove Rosie to Wisconsin, and they were both using meth. Rosie was supposed to shoot Lara Plamann with Candy Sivany's gun. The motive for the murder was that Diana was upset because Lara was cheating on her. Rosie and Candy arrived at Laura's home. Diana Sivany signaled Plamann was home by turning on the porch light. Candy took the gun out of the glove box and went into the house by herself because Rosie refused to participate. Candy walked Lara Plamann out of her house. Rosie followed them to the outbuilding, and Candy shot Lara Plamann. They gave Rosie $300 in drugs to keep quiet. Rosie gave the bullet to investigators, and they confirmed it was consistent with the size and caliber of the bullet removed from Laura's body during autopsy. Investigators spoke with Rosie Campbell's ex-boyfriend, and he said Rosie told him she shot Lara Plamann in 2007. Campbell's ex-boyfriend gave detectives a recording where Rosie said she pulled the trigger. This solidified investigators' decision to charge both Sivanys and Rosie Campbell with murder. In December 2013, a judge reduced Candy and Diana's bond from $1 million to $500,000. This was after defense attorneys argued that Rosie Campbell's confession was completely manufactured and coerced. The prosecution caused several delays in the trial because they had a difficult time disclosing evidence to the defense. Additionally, the defense argued that there was no DNA evidence or gunshot residue. The judge ultimately lowered the bail because of the delays by the prosecution. On February 10, 2014, the defense argued for separate trials for the Sivanese and asked that the eyewitness, Rosie Campbell, receive a mental evaluation, which could limit her testimony for the trial. They asked for a venue change, but the judge denied it. Airborne allergens are the most common allergy triggers, such as pollen, pet dander, dust mites, and mold. So what's the solution? Air Doctor. Air Doctor filters out contaminants and allergens so your lungs don't have to. Air Doctor uses an ultra HEPA filter that's been independently tested to remove 99.99% of tested bacteria and viruses. Allergens can vary in size, but the average pollen size is about 25 microns. Air Doctor virtually removes 100% of particles as small as 0.003 microns in size. Their classic Air Doctor 3000 purifier is powerful enough to circulate the air in a 630-plus square foot room 4 times an hour. Air Doctor comes with a no-questions-asked, 30-day money-back guarantee. So if you don't love it, just send it back for a refund, minus the shipping. So head to airdoctorpro.com and use promo code BEYOND. And depending on the model, you'll receive up to 40% off. You're saving up to 40% off. Lock this special offer by going to airdoctorpro.com and use promo code BEYOND. On May 13, 2014, the judge said the Sivanese right to a speedy trial had been violated because of the prosecution's delays in providing evidence to the defense. The delays made it difficult for the defense to prepare for the trial. The judge scolded the state for continuing to delay the case and said it wasn't in the interest of justice. She also said that the way the Outagamie County Sheriff's investigators handled the case was problematic because of their lack of accountability with record-keeping. The defense asked for additional evidence and details about what witnesses were given because there were many payments unexplained. When investigators provided the defense with a 2-page spreadsheet that documented these details to the best of their recollection, there were a dozen entries that lacked an explanation why certain witnesses received money. $400 for food, gas, and travel was given to key witnesses but wasn't properly explained in police reports. Maps that witnesses drew to assist the investigation had been destroyed instead of kept and turned over to the defense. The judge ordered that Diana and Candy Sivany be released from jail because of the violation of state law for their right to a speedy trial. When a defendant asks for a speedy trial, their case must be heard within 90 days. Their impending trials were tentatively scheduled for August and September. The Sheriff's Department maintained that the case was handled properly, and nothing significant was given to the witnesses without documentation or used to influence them. By June 2014, it was evident that the case against the defendants was crumbling. There was proof that Candy Sivany's cell phone never left Minnesota on the day Lara Plamann was murdered. She also received calls and called out on her cell phone in Minnesota at the time of the murder in Wisconsin. Police never asked the witness who made calls to Candy's phone if it was actually Candy on the line or someone else who had her phone. On July 24, 2014, the lead witness for the state, Rosie Campbell, said that police coerced her confession, and she wanted the judge to throw it out. She would not testify against Diana or Candy Sivany, even if given immunity by the prosecution. Rosie planned to assert her constitutional right to remain silent and asked for a 90-day speedy trial. The prosecutor said that the testimony of Rosie was imperative to the case against the Sivanys. The Outagamie Sheriff's Department detective read Rosie her Miranda rights prior to her interview back in 2013, but she lacked the ability to comprehend it, which meant they violated her rights. A psychologist interviewed Rosie Campbell and evaluated her IQ, mental state, and understanding of Miranda rights. The doctor found she lacked a sufficient understanding of her right to silence and was extremely susceptible to shifting her response under minimal pressure from the investigator. Rosie had a rough upbringing with an abusive past, and she suffered from mental disorders. She had been hospitalized many times for bipolar disorder, anxiety, depression, and personality disorders. Rosie suffered from auditory and visual disturbances, including hearing voices and seeing shadowy figures. She underwent a series of tests to evaluate her ability to understand her rights. She had perfect scores for understanding an interrogation and her right to an attorney, but could not grasp the significance of the right to remain silent. Rosie was in the 37th percentile of average adults in her ability to comprehend Miranda rights. She was easily swayed from her initial recollection of events when she received negative feedback from authorities. The doctor said that those personality characteristics may have made her particularly vulnerable to inappropriate interrogation tactics, and there were many questions about the accuracy of the statements she made. Rosie made new statements that were drastically different to the original confession that she gave police back in 2013. Rosie met Candy Sivany in 2005, and they smoked meth together. Rosie would ride along with Candy when she made drug deliveries. Candy had a gun in her glove box, and that was when Rosie removed a bullet from the gun, which she gave to police. This drug trip happened 2 months prior to Laura's death. She originally told police that she took the bullet after Lara Plamann was shot. Rosie said when she was interviewed by police in 2013, she was on crack cocaine. Police bought her a chicken dinner, and she thought they were her friends and wanted to help them, so she said what they wanted her to say. Rosie Campbell's refusal to testify against the Sivanys was a major blow to the case that had become mired with procedural and investigative issues. Since the lead witness for the state was compromised, Diana and Candy Sivany's trials were delayed. In September 2014, Rosie Campbell was hospitalized, and she withdrew her demand for a speedy trial. Her trial was delayed, and the prosecution needed additional time to prepare for the trial, now that they did not have their lead witness. On October 21, 2014, the prosecutor agreed to drop Rosie Campbell's homicide charge if she testified against Diana and Candy Sivany. Campbell pleaded no contest to theft and party to criminal damage to property as part of the plea agreement. The district attorney recommended 6 to 8 months in jail and 3 years of probation. The DA wanted Rosie Campbell behind bars during Diana and Candy's trials, which were now scheduled for February and June 2015. On January 15, 2015, the judge did not take the prosecutor's sentencing recommendations and threw the proverbial book at Rosie Campbell. He sentenced her to 5.5 years in prison and 2 years of parole. These were the maximum sentences for criminal damage to property and theft as a repeated offender. Rosie received credit for the 2 years she spent in jail. When she heard the sentence, she collapsed, slid off her chair, and fell on the floor. Rosie briefly received medical attention. After the shock of her sentence wore off, Rosie tried to remain upbeat. "I would just like to thank God first for the opportunity to better myself. I've made mistakes and hurt people, and I am wholeheartedly sorry. I hope to be released as soon as possible. I'm ready to work at it and learn." If Rosie Campbell changed her mind and decided to not testify against the Sivanys, the prosecution could ask the judge to revoke her sentence. The plea agreement prevented the prosecution from refiling the homicide charge against her. On January 29, 2015, the Sivanys asked the judge to exclude Rosie Campbell's testimony from trial, given her lack of credibility. On February 2, 2015, the prosecutor asked the court to dismiss the homicide charge against Candy Sivany. The key witness, Rosie Campbell, was not a reliable witness per her psychological evaluation, and she made additional statements while in jail that further damaged her credibility. They did not report those statements in the media. The police investigation had been questionable, and Candy Sivany had an alibi, confirmed by witness testimony and her cell phone. The prosecution just didn't have a case. On April 14, 2015, the case against 55-year-old Diana Sivany was also dismissed without prejudice, meaning murder charges could be refiled in the future. The defense team was unhappy the Sivanys could be charged in the future, and that detectives did such a poor job with the investigation. The defense said the tragedy was that Laura's murderer remains at large, and they will probably never be charged. Lara Plamann's relatives believed in the work investigators performed, and were disappointed that the court catered to the demands of the defense. The lead detective who worked the case from July 2008 to February 2013 at the Outagamie County Sheriff's Office believed they made no mistakes during the investigation, and he was confident in his theory about the 3-person murder conspiracy. The detective believed that the sheriff's department followed up on everything, missed nothing, and was confident in their findings. He didn't want to turn the case over to the Wisconsin Department of Justice's Division of Criminal Investigation Unit or to the Cold Case Review Team affiliated with the Wisconsin Association of Homicide Investigators. The lead detective said there was no need to turn over the case, and he didn't think anybody could do a better job or be more thorough. Not everyone who examined this case felt the same way. Gregory Giberston is a nationally recognized expert on law enforcement and police standards and practices. And he said, "These investigators for Outagamie County did a completely incompetent job. These cops, for whatever reason, totally mishandled this case. It's fatally flawed from the beginning. I believe it could have been solved during the initial stages of the investigation. I absolutely do." There were many missteps with the investigation. The deputy who initially went to the property on the first night Laura was missing should have walked every inch of the property, given her car was there, along with her wallet and credit cards. This gave the killer additional time to destroy and conceal evidence, including the handgun, which was never recovered. When Diana Sivany called deputies the next day, she asked them to wait a few hours before they searched her property, because she had a few errands to run. At 8 a.m., she went to Laura's parents to take care of the morning farm chores. Laura's mom was upset when she learned that her daughter was missing and Diana was doing farm chores instead of looking for Laura. Laura had been in a relationship with both Andrea Shea and Diana Sivany, but investigators didn't treat the women as suspects and instead thought Laura committed suicide. The sheriff's office let a few more days pass before they made a formal statement. Investigators didn't verify Andrea Shea's statement that Laura didn't show up for the movie date because the movie rental store didn't have surveillance cameras. There were creepy online messages being posted by a man. He posted about a woman who was murdered within a mile of his home and said she got what she deserved. This man had also sent photos of his privates to women years earlier. Police visited him, and he had an extensive collection of firearms. He also admitted to making posts about Lara Plamann online. This was never investigated further. A woman witnessed a pushing match on the afternoon of Laura's murder as she drove by the Plamann-Sivany property around 3:30 p.m. The witness thought that the pushing match was between Lara Plamann and Andrea Shea. When investigators questioned Andrea, she said she didn't work on the day of the murder, and she was probably at home at that time. Andrea said she wasn't at Laura's house that day and couldn't imagine Laura getting into a physical altercation with anyone. The eyewitness was sure that Diana was not involved in the altercation because she was highly identifiable, as she had a light blonde mullet. It was reported that they could spot her hair a mile away. This tip was forgotten about, and they did not look into Andrea Shea as a suspect. Investigators failed to subpoena her cell phone records, and she later moved to Florida. The crime lab in Madison, Wisconsin, determined that the murder weapon was an AMT 380 backup pistol. They did not make this gun after the 1990s. The ammunition was most likely Frontier 380, and they had not made the bullet since 1994. Diana said that she and Lara didn't have any guns in their home and never owned a gun in her life. When investigators called Diana's ex-girlfriend in Alaska, she said that Diana once pulled out a gun when they were driving and fired it out of the car window in 1995. Investigators didn't travel to Alaska to interview people Diana Sivany had known. They did work with a friend of Laura's mother, who recorded several conversations with Diana Sivany, hoping she would confess to the murder, but that never happened. The Plamann family went to meet a local psychic to get help on their daughter's murder. Laura's case was stalling under the original detective, and he went with the family to speak with the psychic. The psychic said that Diana paid someone to commit the crime. She also said that the gun was in a chicken coop at one of the Plamann's relatives. Investigators actually went and checked the chicken coop, and of course there was no gun found. Investigators learned that Diana's daughter, Candy, was arrested for dealing meth, and then they thought maybe Lara was shot by Candy Sivany. In January 2011, Rosie Campbell agreed to wear a wire, and she went to the home of a man named Dennis Johnson. She tried to get him to admit that he got Candy Sivany the gun, which killed Lara Plamann. Dennis was upset and claimed he did not get a gun for Candy. Then Rosie engaged in sexual acts with Dennis Johnson, purchased drugs, and consumed them all while being recorded by police. Even back in 2011, she proved to be an unreliable resource for investigators. On February 11, 2013, Curtis Walker said he recorded his ex-girlfriend, Rosie Campbell, confessing to murder. But he expected a payout for snitching. Curtis was on the verge of being homeless. Investigators gave him $50 so he could stay at the Midway Motel for the night. The next day, they gave him $100 for 2 more nights at the motel, plus $50 for food. This was what ultimately led to Rosie, Diana, and Candy's arrests. Rosie said she lied to Curtis because she didn't want him to think that she was a wimp. After detectives said she was going down for murder, Rosie pointed the finger at Candy and gave police a confession of sorts. But her confession didn't line up with the facts of the case. Rosie couldn't identify what Lara wore on the day she was murdered. Rosie said Lara was shot in the chest while standing. Lara was found sitting, and the autopsy showed she was shot twice from behind. Candy Sivany's cell phone received calls around 5 and 6 p.m. on October 17, 2007, from a St. Paul man. She called him back 3 times between 6 and 8:15 p.m. All the calls bounced off cell towers in the Twin Cities. The narrative that the state stuck with was deeply flawed, and it was clear why the prosecution had to withdraw the murder cases against Candy and Diana Sivany. Lara Plamann met Diana Sivany in an online chat room in 1998, while Lara was finishing up her college degrees. Diana was originally from Minnesota, but had also lived in Nebraska and Alaska. Her husband was stationed at the Air Force Base near Omaha, Nebraska, when he discovered that his wife was seeing a college-aged girl. They separated in 1987 and divorced in 1991. Diana lived in Alaska for 10 years, from 1988 to 1998, and was in a relationship with a woman. They ran a painting business together. In 1998, Diana moved from Alaska to Wisconsin to be with Lara, and they bought the property in Greenville, Wisconsin, where they both lived, and ran an online dog agility equipment business, which brought in about $70,000 annually. Diana was almost 20 years her senior. Lara and Diana were in a domestic partnership, but they also had an open relationship where they were allowed to see other people. Diana had a non-sexual friendship with a woman who lived in Oshkosh. Lara had a sexual relationship with her friend Andrea Shea. The Plamann family recognized Andrea in Lara's obituary and called her a special friend, as was Diana Sivany. Andrea and Lara stopped the intimate part of the relationship 2 weeks prior to Lara's murder and settled on friendship. The relationship dynamics were not well communicated by Lara's family, who declined to speak on her personal life. Investigators, and even the local newspaper, tiptoed around the same-sex aspect of the relationship and only mentioned the open relationship one time in print, years after the murder. Euphemisms like roommate or special friend were often used. This was an important fact that applied to the murder investigation. When investigators and the media can't speak plainly or accurately about the relationship dynamic, it really doesn't facilitate witnesses or individuals with information to come forward. The Plamann family still believes that Diana and Candy Sivany are responsible for Laura's murder. They don't think that Laura's murderers will ever go to trial. Mary Jo and Larry Plamann have a full and busy life. The Plamanns had to upgrade their farm. The 2013 Fox Valley tornado destroyed the old barn, so they built a new one. They have several grandkids that keep them on their toes. Larry Plamann said, "Our family has moved on. We really miss her, though." As of the last reporting by the media, Rosie Campbell had been serving time at Tachita Correctional Institution in Wisconsin for unrelated vandalism crime. Candy and Diana Sivany were free and living in Minnesota. Lara Plamann's case remains unsolved, and as of August 21st, 2021, Sergeant Nathan Borman said a team of investigators is reviewing evidence in the case. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of Beyond Contempt. Please visit BeyondContemptPodcast.com for the links to the sources and music used in this episode. Research, writing, editing, audio production, and sound design were performed by me, Renee. If you like the show, please leave me a positive review in Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Thank you so much, everyone.